Welcome to Unfamiliar Territory, an anime podcast hosted by two white dudes who've been friends for over 15 years. We talk about the history and influence of anime, as well as review anime new and old, believe in the stars, and sail away for the future into unfamiliar territory.
My name is Grant.
And I'm Brantley.
Hey, Brantley, can you hand me that wrench?
No, sorry, we're recording remotely, I can't.
But I need to finish making this robot. It's Podcastix. It's a robot that makes our podcast better.
No, sorry, I can't hand you this wrench.
Dude, you literally
I have the wrench. Here. Can you go on video? I'll show you. It's in here, I swear. But no, anyways, can't do that. If we let Podcastix take my position, then what am I gonna do, huh?
Podcastix.
I'm just not here anymore.
Podcastix isn't gonna. He's not gonna replace you, Brantley. He's a robot for everyone, and by everyone, I mean
everyone?
you and just you and me at this point,
and all of our lovely viewers,
all of them,
listeners.
And he will help us. He will help us make this podcast funny.
Well, okay, I guess I can break the laws of physics and hand you that wrench then.
Thanks. Awesome. So Brantley, what did we watch a lot of?
Well, more than one thing this time. We watched Cubix to start because boy, we made a bet and we lost.
We did. Yes, I did make a bet. Because we don't get a lot of people to talk on our show or comment or even interact. I made a bet that we'd watch it. And we got like one of 3 comments saying we should watch it. So we did. And
shout out to you for forcing us to watch Cubix.
Hika Yugami, who commented on our Tokyo Mew 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 Power episode. Thanks for sending us on this dive.
Mm-hmm. You are responsible for what you've created here, and I hope you're proud, because I think we've thoroughly enjoyed this.
I was unaware when I knew about Cubix and the little knowledge that I had of Cubix that it actually was a South Korean 3D animation show. I thought it was American made, because I remember very, very little about Cubix. But apparently it was actually dubbed over in English by 4Kids.
Mm-hmm. And we now know this strictly because we were forced into watching this show.
It brought back some weird nostalgia of my early childhood and watching shows that just kind of didn't exist outside the realm of like 4Kids or outside the realm of Burger King toys. Brantley, can you give us a rundown of the first 3 episodes we watched of Cubix?
Okay, so Cubix is a show about a boy comes to new town without really being told, but he's moving. Surprise. Goes to Bubble Town, and this is a town of robots. Wow. There's robots everywhere because robots are for everyone, but not for our protagonist Connor because his father, Graham, is a robot racist. Connor is upset about that, but he soon finds out that his neighbor, Abby, well, she's got a robot. And he's even capable of fixing said robot. So one way or another, he's now suddenly in the Bodies Club. Not bodies as in, like, human bodies with a D, but bodies as in bodies club, which had us actually confused for, I think all 3 episodes we watched. Across the span of which, Connor joins the club by successfully repairing a robot, Cubix. Cubix was supposed to be unfixable, at least definitely for a kid like him, but hey, he did it by pulling an all-nighter, which is not healthy. And then after that, they've been on escapades of basically stopping berserk robots, or at least trying to. Meanwhile, the villain of the show takes some liquid nasty out of them, and then they start behaving enough for them to, pile drive them. And that was basically the first 3 episodes. A robot goes berserk. They try to stop it. The villain slurps the soup right out, escapes, and then they deal with just kind of getting the robot back online.
I don't like that you said the nasty liquid.
Liquid
I don't
nasty.
think that's a liquid nasty.
Yeah, that's how you make your car go faster, right? It's illegal, but you can do it. Liquid nasty.
So Connor is voiced by Andrew Rannells, who we've talked about before.
Keisha's back in the picture. Our boy.
Catch you later, kitty cat.
Well, I think he's the reason that we talked about Cubix. I think we looked into him in his voice acting career.
Yep. But
he is Tony Award winning Andrew Rannells, and I think it's interesting because going back through it, Connor was one of his first things he did, and I think that is it's nice to see someone be able to break out of the 4Kids mold and make it big.
Yeah.
So, Brantley.
Yes.
What did you think of Cubix?
What did I think of Cubix? No, you see, it's got nothing to do with what I think, because you're gonna sell Cubix to me.
I'm gonna sell.
Like your life depends on it. You have to sell Cubix. Okay.
I don't believe in this product, Brantley.
Okay. Well, then in that case, Shark Tank's over. So.
I do have a few things that
it's okay. I killed your bit. You can kill mine. So
I think one of the things that's pretty interesting about Cubix is because it is a South Korean show. All the characters are Korean, which is something that is pretty interesting, and there really isn't that much representation in Western media of Korean media. I mean, with K dramas becoming more popular, we do get to see that, but it was very interesting because besides whitewashing their names, they didn't try and change any animation or change any references. So it's pretty nice to see some Korean representation in TV. I don't know if it would have really. It seemed like it might have gone over people's heads as a kid because I didn't realize it. Yeah, I just saw a cool GameCube robot who can transform.
It is interesting. Like back then, I feel like maybe I picked up on the sort of Asian stylings of the characters, but that would have been it, and really only like maybe in one character design. By the way, I didn't ever watch the show outside of commercials. And even then, I was kind of like, "Oh, this show doesn't look so good." But in doing so, like, I think I only ever interpreted maybe the Glasses Kid to be of an Asian ethnicity. But now looking back at it, like, it's like, oh, I feel like these characters were, as much as they are cartoons, they're designed to have like epicanthic folds on and whatever that like establishes them as Korean. It's like cool. I don't think we get enough of that in a way that's like actually realized. Right. You get like various cartoons. It's like here's kid of culture, and then they're doing some fun fantasy stuff or whatever. But it almost doesn't quite feel like they're that deep into what that kid's culture is. Right. From like the design level. Not to like, I know I'm painting with broad strokes here, but I'm just trying to say Cubix stood out for that, and it's one of the reasons why I was interested in actually exploring more into the details around the show, not just what's in it.
Right. I will say, going through the voice cast again, we have multiple unknown voice actors for multiple characters. Mm-hmm. Colossus, Don, Mr. Fix-It, Diagnostics, and Waitrix are unknown voice actors. In fact, most of the cast that isn't the main cast is unknown, and that's mind-boggling to me. This Yikes. Is a mission that I want to figure out eventually. But I would say that as a kid, if I were a kid watching Cubix, I would be pretty okay with it. I feel like it's very, very basic. Mm-hmm. And 4Kids does the thing where it has no time to kind of rest. The characters just keep talking and talking and talking. Mm-hmm. And It even does the 90s style. Well, look at us. Freeze frame. How did we get here?
Yeah.
And I was excited to see it, but
when we were watching, you called out like the times when characters are like just talking. Connor has like monologues in his head, and that you could remove those monologues and the scene would just read as dramatic, without them. And we haven't tested yet. We haven't gone to like, other versions of this, but that was interesting to think like, oh yeah, I bet that was another 4Kids ad.
Yeah.
If you find out, go comment and help us continue this chain.
Figure out Cubix lore.
While we're on this tangent, I want to slip in. I'm real sorry. We also found out this show is on my anime list, because it did get a Japanese iteration, and it was kind of fun to see that, yes, they do Japanese-ize everything in that localization as well. So in the same sense that Connor is obviously not this kid's real name. In Japan, it's been made Ichiro, which is definitely also not the main character's real name from the origins of Cubix.
We looked it up. It wasn't the same.
It's interesting to think like the impact that it could have on the show, and it kind of made me sad that we didn't have like the South Korean version on hand.
I couldn't find it. Like I actually tried to find it, and it I'm not saying it's lost to time, but for the sake of being dramatic, it's been lost to time. Yeah. It is lost media. And so
this is what 4Kids does, man. Like when you have to second guess what's been sort of changed in translation, it's exciting now to sort of reconfigure that. Or at least to think about it. Not great implications in the moment,
Right. I think something that's interesting about Cubix is that it's, even though it doesn't have a very active overarching story, it does have a slight overarching story. Mm-hmm. And that's something that was weirdly popular in the early 2000s, but not continuously. Mm-hmm. It was few and far between. You had a few American cartoons that did it, and so I think that was probably something, because there was a lot of 4Kids shows that I'd be interested in, and I'd be like, oh, what's the story? How does this play out? And Cubix probably did that to me. I think I saw a couple episodes of Cubix as a kid. Like I said, my really only memory of Cubix prior to watching it was that I did have a Burger King toy of Cubix. Mm-hmm.
Cubix was made to be a Burger King toy, let's be honest.
So, Brantley, what do you think of the... Let's talk a little bit about the animation of Cubix.
See, for a little bit of background, I studied 3D animation somewhat. I didn't go very far into it because I realized it was a kind of a time sink and I didn't enjoy it that thoroughly. So I got through your basic modeling, texturing, etc. I did fine, great even, as per like the standards that I was getting graded on, but I'd see other people going through 3D animation and just essentially the grinder it was. They had no time to work on any other classes, and even then their work wasn't turning out in a way that made them feel satisfied. And so I backed out of that, and instead focused on more like game dev and scripting and stuff like that, and then beyond that, education. But I think for that reason, I have like an appreciation for what shows like Cubix can pull together for TV animation using 3D. Although we kind of look at 3D as like a shortcut these days. You build the skeleton, you just puppet it around. It's that easy. You don't have to redraw things. Back then, people were still creating the tools and learning from scratch. We didn't have an education system in place that was, understanding of this technology enough to teach it because it was still being formed, Like, imagine trying to teach everybody, a whole population, about how babies grow up when you're a population that's only now getting to see a baby, grow while you all were growing simultaneously as adults. This is an awful analogy. I'm sorry.
It makes sense, though.
But like it's this 3D animation, in a sense, is still in its infancy. Debatably, but definitely in like the early 2000s, the early 90s. Sure, we were getting like our heads wrapped around vector graphics and whatnot. A lot of that was pushed because of World War II technology needs. Whatever we could do to sort of digitally, represent things and radar and tracking data and keeping data and running calculations, all that warmongering nonsense happened to be a really big boost for what would become computer graphics and computer programming in general. That being said, we really didn't get seated with the idea of computer animation until I want to say like mid 80s or early 80s. So when you think about it, like for people trying to actually, use polygons to form shapes and then making those shapes move around in ways that are appealing and represent art in a span of, anywhere from 20 to 50 years, depending on how sort of liberal you're being with the history of this thing. It's impressive that we've gotten here at all,
Right.
People had been painting for centuries before we could film many of those paintings happening one after another for animation. And so for 3D animation to sort of crop up so quickly, it was a messy snowball of a process. So Cubix looks ugly, but that's understandable. That's perfectly normal.
You had a very, very in-depth and very, very analytical look at 3D animation, and you keep going, and you're thinking, oh, is he gonna be like, and for the time it looks great, or for the time it did what it did, and you just opened and you just took a shit on Cubix.
Listen, man. Okay, so now I get to walk it back. When I look at Cubix these days, it really doesn't bother me. Like it's like I have somehow reformatted my brain to understand just how hard what they were doing is, and how it still continues to be difficult in some ways. I know, like, myself as a student of this stuff and my students, we tend to get kind of, like, armchair-y about this stuff. To be like, oh, it's not that hard. You just make a skeleton. You just rig the model. But to do so successfully and quickly, and with a marketable edge, that's hard. And we're not good at admitting that. And so, if someone were to ask me, hey, that Cubix show, how does it look? Of course I'm gonna say, no, you're not gonna like how it looks. It doesn't, as a kid, I could tell it was a little wonky. In fact, I had like a whole kind of association with like weird looking or gross animated cartoons and their tie-in with like fast food toys. That's a whole like psychological deep dive in me. But like when you said like Cubix is a Burger King toy, it's like, yep, that's exactly how I would associate it. If it's a weird 3D animation or kind of a sloppy looking Nickelodeon style 90s cartoon, I would just immediately like rope that in with like Burger King toy. I don't know why. Anyways, when I look at it now, it doesn't really bother me at all. I can actually point out things to myself and say, hey, I think that's kind of cool. That's kind of impressive. That was a good sequence. So on and so forth. Right. So how does it look like to you?
It fits this almost nostalgic, uncanny, like, there's something deeply upsetting about Cubix.
Cubix awakens a horror beneath the skin.
Well, kind of. So
What is behind Connor's mouth bag?
right. Well, Cubix unsettles me in the same way that, like, and we'll talk about Transformers Beast Wars in a moment, but there's a time when you're a child, when you're like, Cubix came out in 2001, so I was like 6 or 7. 6 or 7. I don't know. I can't do math right now. Either way, Cubix came out in 2001, and there is this. I was 5 or 6 when Cubix came out. I'm pretty sure I was 6. And you look at Cubix as a 6-year-old,
or a 5-year-old,
or a 5-year-old,
or a 7-year-old,
and you look at it and you go, "There's something wrong with the way the show looks." And there are moments like when you watch, there's moments like that in Toy Story as well, and Toy Story still looks okay today. Mm-hmm. But there are times like when the robots come out of the sand, or the kids are walking up to the front door in Toy Story, not the robots, the toys. Mm-hmm. And as you're watching it, you kind of look at it and you're like, this is weird. Mm-hmm. And there's this almost like primal feeling of something is not right here. Mm-hmm. And my goodness, does Cubix make me feel that now? And it made me feel it as a kid. Mm-hmm. Now, there are other 3D animated shows that don't do it as much, but even as of recent, sometimes it's this uncanny valley, except the opposite, where you're almost unimmersed from the media because of one little thing that's just so awful. Mm-hmm. But yeah, it's upsetting. It looks upsetting, and it upsets me in an almost fight or flight response kind of way.
Mm-hmm. So perhaps, like, if we're flipping the uncanny valley, what would that be? Like a dissociative mountain. I don't know. Where you just look at it and your eyes go, your gaze just goes through the TV. We can come up with a snappy name.
I kind of like dissociative mountain. I know it's not snappy, but there's something very funny about it. Mm-hmm. And that's not to say that the people that made Cubix didn't do a good job. I think Cubix looks fine. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's the thing about early 3D animation. The best early 3D animation are shows that cheated.
Yep. Or
not really cheated, but they took something that was uncanny and they made sure that it made sense.
Case in point. Like the
VeggieTales, exactly. VeggieTales came out 7 years before Cubix, mm-hmm. and it looked good. Mm-hmm. It looked good then. It looks all right now. What's the story between? You told me a story between Larry's cheeks.
Yeah, from what I recall, the Disney animators had asked.
Sorry.
You okay? Thinking about VeggieTales got you the giggles.
What? No, Some good old Christian fun brand. I said Larry's cheeks. That I'm thinking of a little cucumber ass right now.
Oh.
Sorry. His cheeks when he puffs on the tuba.
Yeah. Because I guess
Pixar.
Someone at Pixar went and asked them. They're like, "How'd you do that? How did you get it to morph like that?" Yeah, that's all I know of the story. But yeah, VeggieTales was innovative or clever enough to get what we now consider as like the bosses of 3D animation, to ask questions.
Right, and I think that's something that they did really good job on, and because they used inanimate objects and gave them, weird proportions and weird large googly eyes, and their mouths were easy to animate,
and cheeks,
and cheeks, and also when we look this up, you have 1 year. Most of them came out within a year of each other.
It was about like 9 months, 6 months sometimes in between.
Right, but they were able to take time. And they made a 30-minute show, and then they had 6 to 9 months to do another 30-minute show.
Mm-hmm.
And that made it all the better.
Mm-hmm.
And with things like Cubix or Beast Wars or ReBoot, they didn't take the time to do that.
Mm-hmm. You've got so much more total runtime across the span of the season.
Right.
Just comparatively, and not only that, like it's kind of a myth that they're making like an episode per week, but at some point they are essentially finishing them and out the door.
Right.
I think I recall hearing like a vague metric that like storyboarding for a season of an American cartoon, that process is like it's a 9-month workshop or something like that. I don't have the details on how Cubix was made, but at some point you are just making more content than your competitor. And when it comes to 3D animation, one of your biggest roadblocks isn't skill, it's rendering time.
Mm-hmm.
How long are you willing to let the computer sit there and think about this scene and how, say, its lighting is calculated before you say, okay, we have to ship.
Right. I agree. I think that with how, you look at probably the most famous early 2000s cartoon, 3D animated cartoon, and it's probably Jimmy Neutron.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I can't think of anything else that made it as far as Jimmy Neutron. And they just pumped out so much stuff. It doesn't always look good, but it made it so that, it was the de facto 3D show.
Yep. It took the prize.
So,
hey, do you think Bob from VeggieTales is able to sit upright even though he's a tomato because he's got those cheeks?
What?
Let's move
Bob?
on.
So while watching Cubix, we came to the realization that as much as you can talk about what's happening in an episode of Cubix, it doesn't really have the longevity to describe it and analyze it as its own TV show. So instead of just talking about Cubix, we watched a couple of other early 2000s, late 90s 3D animated shows. I think they were all late 90s, actually.
Yeah, and ReBoot was 94, Beast Wars was 96.
Right, and Cubix was 2001. Mm-hmm. So we did have
robots
one
for
early
2001.
So ReBoot was pretty big for its time.
Mm-hmm.
And it looks bad.
Everything except one thing.
And there's a scene with the little kid, what's his name? I don't remember. Endo? I don't know. But he yells at the camera and it looks good. And the thing about ReBoot that Cubix doesn't do well is ReBoot has really good mouth movements.
Mm-hmm. Lip syncing is good. Which is shocking.
But ReBoot didn't cheat in the way that VeggieTales cheated, or in the ways that Toy Story cheated. It did have, and it could have. It really could have. It is
Enzo.
ReBoot.
Sorry. Continue. Yeah,
What?
so ReBoot.
Yeah.
Okay, Enzo. So ReBoot's not cheating.
Because ReBoot is, in case you are unaware of what ReBoot is a CGI show from 1994 about programs living in a computer system and fighting against a virus, and also the player, which is humans who play a game, and if they win, they destroy part of that computer or the city, and people die. It's pretty dark.
Mm-hmm.
It goes into it fast. There's a lot in the first episode, but they didn't cheat. They could have easily made some weird 3D robot-like characters,
and
but
that's
they're
what
human.
makes up a lot of the background cast, surprisingly. But yeah, as you mentioned, the main characters, they're just rigged humans.
And I think it's definitely ambitious. And I think that you look at where ReBoot fails, and I wouldn't even say ReBoot failed because it's incredibly popular still. It has a cult following.
Yes.
But ReBoot took this incredibly new technology, and they tried their damnedest to make it look good. And because of that, that's what, kind of sends 3D animation into what it is today. Someone had to make the first shitty looking 3D animated TV show. Mm-hmm. And for being a shitty looking TV animated show, it's a little bit more tolerable than Cubix.
Yeah, I could agree with that.
I think that there's something to be said when it does give it a little bit of leeway, because even if the characters are very human, they still have like shiny iridescent hair and like stiff jaws, and it doesn't look terribly weird because they have green skin or blue skin. Mm-hmm. But the backgrounds are very, very abstract, and they don't try and make it look like a place that people actually live, which Cubix at least tried to do. Mm-hmm. But it still did a really good job at making the characters not totally ugly. Mm-hmm. They are ugly. They are terrifying. And I don't even think that I don't think that Cubix or ReBoot has anything on Beast Wars when it comes to ugliness. So after we watched ReBoot, we only watched one episode of ReBoot, and it was a long 22-minute episode.
Mm-hmm. So is Cubix, but ReBoot has the dark subject matter that kind of... Because you are kind of sitting there for a moment being like, so human players are like these myriad gods who are unbelievably and unknowingly wrathful on this world. Okay, right. And time for a fun little sequence where the diner kind of gets shaken up. It's like, oh, okay.
Yeah, and I think that ReBoot does lean a little heavier into its existentialism and like godlike player. Yeah. But does it? I don't know.
I can only assume so. Knowing that people get hype over the plot in particular, I'm assuming that the implications eventually do unfold, or that right. It stays like the center point of the show.
Right, and I think that's pretty exciting. After we watched ReBoot, we watched one episode, and we were hanging out with some friends essentially online, and we mentioned Beast Wars, and one of our friends loves Beast Wars, and so we actually watched like about 3 episodes of Beast Wars. Right,
we got through 2 episodes. Yep,
and it's all on YouTube, but it's segmented at like 6-minute intervals.
The classic experience. Yeah. 5 parts to episode 1, 4 parts to episode 2, what have you.
And the worst part about Beast Wars is it's a Transformers film that has all original characters, essentially. Like, you have characters that are, like, typecasted as the Jazz of this episode, or the Starscream, but they're not technically in it. It still has Megatron and Optimus Prime, mm-hmm. but they're Optimus Primal and, like, Dinotron, I think. But what's crazy about Beast Wars is they could have cheated. They could have made a show with stiff-faced robots, because the old Transformers cartoons did not have emotion faces. They bent a couple ways, but not a lot. Mm-hmm. And they didn't do it. They had them crash land on a desolate planet that had a bunch of not primal, but it had a bunch of different animals, and they're like, all right, well, robots should be easy to render in 3D and at least make a little less uncanny, but nah, we're gonna make them look like animals. And they're not robot animals. It's not like this gorilla has a robot face and mechanical arms. It's just a straight up 3D gorilla that transforms into Optimus Prime. Mm-hmm. And it's
the skin terrifying. Of a real animal on it's top of a robot transforming body. Ugh.
And so while it's very ugly in a lot of ways, it has some pretty good voice acting. Mm-hmm. And the story is pretty intense from the get-go. The first episode opens up with one of the characters betraying another character, and he joins the other side, because you have we have a continuity, but far more of one than
Like, we have a legit continuity as compared to Cubix's, like, light overarching style.
And
And
it was
Reboot's kind of the same way as Cubix, at least to start, from what I understand.
Yeah, and it's pretty. It was, there was some legitimate, like, interesting things going on.
We were gonna just watch one episode, and then it cut off at a cliffhanger. That's what we're dealing with here. It's like Beast Wars had a cliffhanger, and then it just bleeds directly into the second episode. If you don't watch the first episode, the second episode makes less sense, which is shocking.
Right, it was shocking, and it had. Obviously, it had like 2.5 minutes of transformation scenes, which are not as exciting as Magical Girl transformation scenes, because it was just like animals contorting their body to be robots.
Screaming excessively.
Yeah, lots of screaming. And it was fine. Like, once again, it's really weird, because at the time, 3D animation was probably a little bit more expensive than 2D animation.
I would wager so, yeah. Especially considering you're buying software, which is new and cutting edge.
Right.
Yeah.
So not only was it more expensive, it was going to look worse.
Mm-hmm.
And yet people still took the time to be like, all right, this has to be a 3D animated show. Now, I'm convinced, and we talked about this, I'm convinced that the robots, the characters in the new Transformers were created before the TV show, because they had to give them a really roundabout reason for them to be animals. The animals just looked like regular animals instead of being like these really, really hyper-designed robot animals. And it really does seem like they're like, hey, we got toys, make a show for it.
Yeah, Takara Tomy or whoever else, like, hey, yeah, we got these robots, and they're animals now. Go make the TV length commercial. In other words, a show.
And there were lots of times where they'd be like, I'm going to transform and shoot my blasters that come out of my shoulders, and I'm going to fly with my jetpack.
Mm-hmm.
But damn, did they manage to make at least a little bit of a compelling storyline?
Mm-hmm. Where it sticks out to me, again, we haven't done the homework on like which came first, toys or show here, but if there's one piece of evidence that is like the clincher for me, it's that the explanation for why they have to be animals and the actual like plots of the episodes that we saw are in vastly varying quality.
Right.
I want you to try to explain to me, because I don't really understand.
Oh, why they need to be animals? Okay, so essentially the planet that they crash on, because it starts off with them, the Decepticons chasing the Autobots in a spaceship, and they fight each other. And the best part is they straight up create a system. So for toys, I'm going to talk a little bit about toy history here. For toys, when they release toys of a series, they'll release a couple at a time. So you'll get like 5 Decepticons and 5 Autobots. And then they'll introduce new ones. And so at the beginning of Transformers Beast Wars, the Autobots jettison a bunch of in stasis Autobots. So they're all in these escape pods in which they're stasis. And they're trying to find them and bring them to basically wake them up. And I watched a little bit of Beast Wars as a kid, and I'm almost positive that the Decepticons find some of the stasis pods and turn them into Decepticons. They're not called Decepticons. I think they're called like Predacons.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But that's what they do. So straight away, they jettison all these different characters that aren't real yet. So all these characters are basically orbiting this planet and falling to the Earth, or this planet. Now, this planet has an atmosphere that is dangerous for robot bodies because it's some sort of rare energy source, and if the robot bodies are exposed to it for too long, they get destroyed or they can't work. So they needed to create a synthetic protecting layer, which they did by the Predacons examined bugs and insects and fossils, so they became dinosaurs, bugs, and insects. And then the Autobots, I can't remember what they called them in this one, they examined mammals and other creatures like that. And it's really weird because all you figure out is that both of these factions want the energy source. And now that I'm thinking about it, nowhere in the show does it make the Predacons bad.
Mm-hmm.
They're just kind of typecast for that.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a little interesting that they kind of had an ambiguous, relationship. I know that they have the Raptor fight the leader of the Predacons, get defeated, and go to the Autobot side.
Mm-hmm.
But I do remember
Team Rocket style.
Right. I remember having arguments with my cousin as a kid about Beast Wars regarding which characters were good and which characters were bad.
Ooh.
And so I'm wondering if this ambiguity carries on throughout the show.
Yeah.
But even when I was a kid, there is a part where the Bat, we didn't get to meet the Bat, but we had a toy of the Bat as a kid, watches a Decepticon or an enemy of his fly over the horizon, and he goes, going, gone. And I think I had that episode on VHS, so I watched it a ton.
Mm-hmm.
And watching that scene, I remember being confused. The show gets sloppy. The show gets ugly. The show gets so messy with what it is trying to do that you have no idea what's happening.
Mm-hmm.
But it had an interesting story.
Yeah, in the meantime, from what we saw at the front end, they have a shockingly well-written, ambiguous sort of resource war happening. The big climax of the second episode is that they find this gigantic source of energon, essentially their way to survive here. And there's so much that practically all of the Autobots and Decepticons, which are called I don't remember what the Autobots are called, something animals,
it's
something.
like mammal something.
Mm-hmm, yeah.
I'm,
and then the
I'll look it
Predacons.
up.
But anyways, there's probably enough there that they could share it. But their instinct is, or for whatever reason, their drive is to fight each other over it and to hoard it for themselves. And lo and behold, they cause a catalytic reaction that causes all of the energon to blow up. So
it's Maximals.
Maximals, yeah. So here in the second episode of the show, there's a legitimate message about how war is futile, and that all you're doing is you're burning out the resources that you both want.
Right.
It's whoa, it is shocking.
Yeah, it is. So I was right. They do try and get the stasis pods, and whoever collects them gets that stasis pod on their team.
I see.
So that was, and for the toys. So this kind of, for me, enhances the idea that they made the toys first.
Mm-hmm.
So they were like, all right, we're going to make the toys and we're going to release them as a series. So we introduced the original 6, and then we're going to release more, and that's when they're going to be acquired in the show. This show had 52 episodes and 3 seasons. Which is a lot.
Yeah.
And it was very polarizing. It did win a Daytime Emmy Award for an outstanding individual achievement in animation. So,
again, ambition,
Yeah, and I mean, in 2011, there was, people were like, hey, it had some of the best story development and writing for a Transformers series. And I wonder if they knew that it would be ugly and it would be hard to follow, so they kind of wanted to make it a little bit more intense.
Yeah, I don't know. It is fascinating,
And this kind of brings me to what I want to talk about next, and that is the story of Cubix and not trusting its audience. This is a thesis. So one of the things that I would realize while watching Beast Wars, or not Beast Wars, well, yes, but Cubix versus Beast Wars and some of the other shows we watched, is how cartoons marketed to children sometimes don't treat their audience as people. It's very interesting watching shows like Tokyo Mew Mew or watching shows like Little Witch Academia, or even like Kipo or Steven Universe or Adventure Time or Avatar. And all of these shows were marketed towards a younger audience, at least in one way or another. But they still tried to tell a story. They still tried to have real world implications. When I was watching the first episode of Cubix, I felt like I was watching just nothing.
Maybe it's because I was putting together pieces myself, but I agree it's not much. What was striking me about it wasn't so much Connor and Cubix, but instead was about what was surrounding them, which was like the parental situation, and like, 'cause I guess Cubix kind of confirms things for itself. Cubix is there in like the promotional art. He's there in the commercials. You know he's gonna get Cubix working. He's gonna get Cubix as a friend that he gets to keep at home. So that tension gets killed. And that's kind of what that first episode's sort of hinging on. But in the meantime, I guess the parental drama was like was a linchpin for me. But outside of that, and you're totally right. It's just kind of bland, a little milky.
It is. And it might get better in following seasons, who's to say? But it's interesting because with more recent cartoons, you have shows, even like Gravity Falls, where it's still a kids show, and it has substance.
Mm-hmm.
And this is kind of a problem I have with a lot of like mid 90s to like early 2000 shows, where it was just kind of trying to fill a niche and to create something. And I think that there's definitely a demand for that. And I think you have like shows like SpongeBob, right, which is just kind of goofy good time, and that's perfect. But it is interesting that as we move forward into, you know, the 2020 and 2021, a lot of kids media is starting to act more like Beast Wars. Mm-hmm. Where there's a lot more writing, and there's a lot more dialogue, and there's a lot more, you know, conflict.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and separate from Beast Wars, so much less focus on direct merchandising. Like, I recall knowing people who were like, I'm dying for Gravity Falls merch. I want something of the show, like an artifact. Can't find anything.
Yeah. And you know what? Same with Avatar.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they didn't have... I think they did maybe one action figure series during its original run, and they did some Lego sets, but it was only for book 1.
Mm-hmm.
There is no merch for... I think they are now starting to do a second action figure series, but they're more like collectible figures.
Right.
But it is interesting that with a lot of old Hasbro shows, they were all marketed to sell toys.
Mm-hmm.
It seems like cartoons have become, as the generation that grew up on cartoons. You know, cartoons have existed forever, but there's something about the 80s cartoons and 90s cartoons that seem to resonate with the kids a little bit more, to continue it to adulthood. Because, you know, you have, you know, my parents, for instance, aren't super, like, nostalgic for the cartoons they watched.
Mm-hmm.
But here we are making a podcast about children's cartoons because we love them so much.
Yeah. I wonder partially if the separation from merchandising has locked in recent times, because you can be platforming the show without commercials, essentially. So like, right. If you have something that's Netflix exclusive, as far as I know, Netflix doesn't have a version that has ads, right?
Netflix has no ads, yeah.
Yeah, so in that sense, even if you had merch for your show, you don't get to advertise that merch while you are watching that show. And so what's the point? You know, instead, you find your other ways of sort of getting people to hook into it. Which I'd assume would be like getting more exclusivity deals, or, you know, licensing somehow the property out to other people who are then going to follow up. But like it's more important to get people to gain an affection for the thing first. That's the impression I get, you know. it's not
Right.
at all an informed one, but it's a gut feeling.
Right. No, that makes sense, and I think you're right. I think that with as it kind of becomes that way, people are more focused on the artistic integrity of the show. I mean, like shows like Kipo or Steven Universe, who there's merch for Steven Universe, but there's not a ton.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like you have more and more people like trying to kind of create this media for children, and that also can speak to adults.
Mm-hmm. I'm making a guess. If ReBoot didn't get a lot of popularity via merchandising, then in a way it's an interesting sort of signal of what cartoons would become eventually, where it's this very spirited, very like internalized story, something that's like reflecting what the authors are creating. In ReBoot's case, it's self-referencing computers and 3D animation as it's being worked on,
Right.
I feel like that sort of passion in informing the show's content has sort of regurgitated now. It's interesting to say the least.
So my question, so we know that 3D animation at the time was a little bit more expensive, or at least we think it is. It might not be.
Taking a guess.
Yeah. Why? I mean, obviously, I think the reason they would do that is because, same reason we did 3D graphics in video games. It was the next evolution step. Someone had to do it, and you kind of set yourself out there if you are the first to do it. But when did 3D animation start becoming more affordable than 2D animation? Because I know as of now, it's cheaper to make a 3D animated show or film than 2D.
I wouldn't have an answer for that, and I don't even know if it's safe to say that 3D animation is cheaper than 2D now.
Okay.
I'm sure it's been fluctuating, because these days you'll see, even like in the days of Flash, you can make a 2D character puppet, which essentially you're not redrawing things frame per frame. Instead, you have this sort of like paper doll of a character that's being translated around, and we're rotating its limbs and stuff, and we're having like a mouth that blends as open and closed.
Okay.
This is to say, I don't know that one has ever been like exclusively more cost effective than the other, but I can't help but feel like the 2010s were when 3D shows found their niche of like, it looks good enough and we're cranking it out.
Right. No, you're right. And I feel like there has been a rise of 3D animated shows, but that's not to say there aren't 2D. I know, like, as much as people hate it, Teen Titans Go is incredibly popular in 2D, but it also, you're right, it kind of does have that kind of flat style that makes it a little bit easier to animate than something a little bit darker and deeper.
Yeah. I guess what comes to mind is like the 3D Inspector Gadget cartoon, like Pac-Man Ghostly Adventures, stuff like that, where like the rendering now looks passable, even if the animation's still kind of stiff or floaty in places. We've gotten to the point where industry professionals know how to make it work in a convenient sort of way. That's still not to undermine the amount of work it takes to get that there. And that goes for 2D animation as well. Because we're always pushing boundaries and, what's the next step for quality bars. But hey, I do think that 3D is at least in a place where it can take a breather.
Right. And I'd see that. All right, so let's do the recommended game. Would you recommend Cubix to anybody?
I would recommend Cubix to everyone. No, I have to say no. Just on the merit that like there's better things you can do in your spare time. If you're hyper interested in like 3D animation in its earlier forms, and you want to see something that's kind of in the halfway point between like Tin Toy and what we have now, and like yeah, maybe go check it out. But you're not missing anything for skipping Cubix in particular. I'd even maybe say the same for Beast Wars. I think Beast Wars has interesting points to it, but you could also probably find plot transcriptions that'll do the work for you and save you some time. Right. ReBoot is a different story. I still don't know that I can wholeheartedly recommend it, but again, if you're interested in having this historic dive, if you really want to if you have that curiosity in you, then check out an episode, and just kind of be wowed by what it is. Because it's something, but
it is. I have the same agreement with you. I do think that Beast Wars would be something that you might want to check out if you're a fan of Transformers.
Yeah.
They are doing a Beast Wars movie eventually, so that's a possibility.
Everything's getting
probably it is. As with that said, is there any closing remarks you have, Brantley?
Yeah, I do have some hypotheticals I want to run by you.
Go for it.
So first, we reboot Cubix in 2020. Besides upgrades to the visual audio fidelity, the obvious stuff, what would you change?
I would keep the Korean names for everybody. I would kind of go a little bit more into the Korean culture.
Mm-hmm.
I do think that shows like Big Hero 6, who have the San Francisco, and even though it's not 100% Japanese culture, it has enough background and enough little flakes of it that it kind of feels natural and it feels authentic. Mm-hmm. I think I would want to keep that, and I think that it's not hard for kids to pronounce Korean names in the West as much as they thought it was.
Yeah,
and I don't think that hurts it at all. I would maybe focus a little bit more on the idea of the prejudice against robots for Graham's dad. I think that you can kind of translate that into real world issues, kind of give it a little bit more focus and keep it a little bit more grounded in reality.
Mm-hmm.
I would change Cubix, the character. I think Cubix is kind of lame. I think his design is cool. I like the shape-shifting robot using cubes. Mm-hmm. But I think the fact that he, unlike other robots in Cubix, can't talk. He can repeat things, and I can see how people think that's charming. I'd give him a little bit more of a personality so he isn't just a tool for Connor.
Yeah. If I can have my one little thing, I was going to say, one of them was Cubix's unsettlingly low intelligence is weirdly out of place. Because the robots with very one-to-one tasks, hey, you come here and I recharge your electronics, that robot can talk about its actual anxiety and depression. But Cubix is brick stupid, which is shocking. I feel like I've said shocking a lot in this episode, which is maybe appropriate because we are talking about robots for everyone. But I think maybe the one thing I would change is Connor's weird slicked back hair.
Oh.
I need you to. I'm getting chills just kind of thinking about it. I need you to revisualize something.
Okay,
so you take
revisualizing.
You know how Connor's hair has that swoop that goes backwards, all the way to the back of his scalp.
Yeah.
If that hair's not going backwards, because it's being pushed, back like that, and it's either gelled or it's just kind of resting there. Normally, it would go forward. Think of how long his bangs are.
Dude, he's got long ass hair.
That's it's putting Skrillex to shame. That is he could literally just he could just take his own hair and stick suck it into his mouth. It's disgusting.
Why did you say
Graham,
that?
why are you raising your child like this? You won't let him have a robot, but you'll let him have that? Dear God. He can choke on it, for God's sakes. I only thought of that today, and I haven't stopped thinking about it since then.
But yeah, I think focusing on the Hella Nemo, the professor character, I actually liked her a lot. I think that it would be fun to have her be a little bit more of the focal point.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe make, her... I know that she's apparently important in the show, and I don't care to watch enough to confirm this, but man, was she the only interesting part of that show.
Mm-hmm. I think she's the daughter of the person who basically invented robots in that universe.
Also, I do want to mention that there are no biological creatures in Cubix in Bubble City besides humans. Everything is robots. The birds are robots. The mice are robots. They don't explain why. They don't say like, we had to replace the animals because they died out, or they're all test animals. No, they're just gone.
Yeah, what a money sink.
And
that's what your tax dollars are going to. Making little robot mice.
It's super weird. Are there any other hypotheticals you have about Cubix?
Well, of course, Grant. Cubix is your friend now. What do you change him into? You cannot kill yourself. What's his new transformation? What do you use him for?
So he can turn into a helicopter, and I feel like having a personal helicopter would make my life impossibly easy. I think that a lot of my problems in life are caused by long transportation. It's not that true anymore. I moved closer to work.
Mm-hmm.
I used to have a 30-minute commute. Now I have an 8-minute commute by car. I could get a bike and be healthy, but man, wouldn't it be nice to just wake up like way late and say, "Hey, Cubix, turn into a helicopter. Let's go to work."
Mm-hmm.
Or like, "Hey, Cubix, I just robbed a bank. Let's get out of here."
Cubix just forms into a wall and blocks the doors.
Yeah. See, Cubix is the ultimate. If you use them for evil and like financial gain, man, now that you've thought about this, I really want Cubix. I would, I could Uber people. Like if I just wanted to make money like legally, I could be the most expensive Uber in my city. Hey, you want to go to a bar across town? Here's a helicopter robot, and I don't know what kind of power he runs on, but I'm sure I would save a lot of money on gas.
Isn't it curious that Cubix is like by invention the most modularly useful and like infinitely helpful robot that's been created, and they're just like letting it sit there like junk?
Okay, because
I guess they can. They wouldn't know like how useful his transforming ability is, but like
this is a Cubix conspiracy theory.
Okay,
so they made Cubix as a prototype to be like, look, we made a robot that can do everything. But guess what? If you make a robot that can do everything, you don't sell a lot of robots, do you?
Mm-hmm.
So they made Cubix, and they're like, oh shit, we need to deactivate this guy because everybody's going to get a Cubix. And then they're never going to buy another one of our robots.
Yeah, patent Cubix, and then let no one else make him.
Right. And so they made him so depressed that he could not turn on. And the only thing that could turn him on is an equally depressed an equally depressed child who wants a friend, who cannot apparently befriend humans because he even says, "You would have made a great friend, Cubix," as if the humans that he befriended earlier in the episode did not count.
And they're standing right there.
And so they're like, haha, there will be no depressed kid. And then Connor shows up. Also, Connor can fix robots, and he doesn't know what a robot is. Like, he knows what robots are.
But I think they actually make reference to this because Connor goes to his dad's donut shop. He's like, "Hey, I could help fix your robots." And he's like, "Well, how about you go fix the radio? Because that could use some work." So I think Connor likes tooling around with like regular like mechanisms and like devices and stuff, but he really wants to work on robots. So I think he got his practice tinkering around with like messing around with more like basic like appliances and stuff.
That's fair, but like I can build a computer. If someone said go fix my oven, I'd be fucking confused.
I mean, valid.
Okay.
Okay, last thing.
Okay.
We obviously know, having watched these early episodes of Cubix, that there's an incredible tension substantiated upon who is going to become Connor's new mom. Is his new guardian going to be Cubix or Hella?
All right, so I actually wrote the alternate ending to Cubix. So
Go on.
So it's the last episode of Cubix, and the evil Dr. Wily, has turned all robots against humanity.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's Hella, Abby's in prison. Chip is dead. And so they're going to do one last assault on the facility, and so they go to attack the doctor. And Graham is alive, but Graham is useless. He's back in the donut shop. He's not useless. He's back in the donut shop, like holding like refugees to make sure that everyone's okay. And so they fight the doctor, and during this fight, Hella gets mortally wounded, and the doctor is killed. But as she's being mortally wounded, Cubix explains, because at this point Cubix has become way more sentient than he is. He explains that he can absorb Hella's memory, and they can become one, essentially. So Cubix's personality will be completely erased. It won't be erased, but it will become her subconscious, and then Hella will become the primary controller of Cubix's body. And Graham holds Cubix, and he looks to Hella, and he knows that Graham is in the donut shop. Connor looks at Cubix and says, "I don't want to lose you, buddy." And then he looks to Hella, and he thinks of his dad, who loves Hella. And so he cries, and he says, "Do it." And so Cubix absorbs Hella's conscious and becomes Cubix Hella, and that is Graham's new mom. And it ends with the show ends with Hella, Graham, and Connor playing out in the front yard. And it zooms in, like, inside Cubix's head, and you see, like, a subconscious Hella and a subconscious Cubix hanging out, and they say, "We raised him right, didn't we?" And then it says the end.
A family can be a dad, a dead mom, a child, a robot dad who includes a dead surrogate mom.
That is the actual canon ending to Cubix, but the network
get this here on Unfamiliar Territory, folks. Breaking news.
All right,
we're done.
So all right. Thank you for listening to this incredibly weird episode of Familiar Territory, which we called Unfamiliar Territory. We're gonna start doing our episode formats a little closer to this one. We found that we enjoy watching larger amounts of the show and then talking about the show as a whole instead of doing live reactions. So when we do our season 2 of Familiar Territory, we will probably workshop it a little bit more and try and get a little bit more reviews and in-depth dives instead of having that live reaction element to our show. And with that, of course, if you liked the content that you listened to, please like, subscribe, and comment. Or don't. We are not your dads.
Hi, Dad.